Hey guys, what's up? It's the Mermail Master back again with another video. This is the follow-up video for the Darklords that I was talking about before. I was going to go through the idea that Darklords, in my personal opinion, are the greatest deck to teach someone the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! The first reason why is because Darklords at their core are an extremely simple deck. It seems like there's like walls of text on things, but once the person who you're trying to teach really gets a hold of the simple and basic strategies, not only will they have a great time playing this deck, but they'll also get to see a lot of the newer mechanics filter in an easy to understand way. First and foremost thing that makes Darklords a great deck to teach someone is that Darklords are full of big beaters. They have a ton of big beaters in their deck, and the idea is to just basically summon a bunch of big dudes and beat down your opponent. The deck also does not have an extra deck, meaning that you don't have to teach the person about like the complicated mechanics of links or XYZs or whatever if that's not what they're doing. You're doing like a slow process where you want them to learn a little bit first, and then then you can build up that knowledge once they have that nice basis. So those are the first two things that make this deck great to play. The second list of things is the fact that while the Darklord monsters themselves are very simple, they all have that common effect as well. And that is the fact that the spells and traps are very, very simple spells and traps that are based off of cards in this game. Banishment of the Darklords is based off of Rhoda. Darklord Contact is based off of Monster Reborn. And then we have Raigeki Break, Change of Heart, and something like Effect Veiler right here. Very, very simple to understand. Very, very short and sweet effects. The cool thing about these cards is that you have the ability with them to say, okay, this is a nice mix of monsters, spells, and traps. If the person who you're trying to teach is trying to learn the game, you can say, okay, this card, for instance, Banishment of the Darklords, is extremely good. It has the downside where you can only use it once per turn. This is a great way to explain to them the idea of hard once per turn with, its statement, you can only activate quote-unquote Banishment of the Darklords once per turn. And it's the same thing on every single one of these cards. A nice common theme that runs towards them is there are those kinds of effects, but they also have those hard once per turns. Now moving on to the third thing that makes this deck great is the common effect that these guys have, where the new Darklords can have you pay 1,000 life points to basically shuffle back one of the spells and traps. Now, that thing is fantastic because you're looking at an effect that is a quick effect and gets around the once per turn restriction. So there's an interesting ruling in the way that the Darklord cards are worded that would technically allow you to activate that effect more than once per turn. The other great thing about this is that that once per turn effect will allow them to learn about the economy. The idea that life points are not as important, but they are a finite resource. So conserving your life points or knowing exactly when to activate those effects so that your life points, are not going to be an issue, as well as when to activate, for instance, the effect of Darklord Ixchel or whatever, take Sanctified Darklords at a perfect time to, stop your opponent in a link play. Or, unfortunately, if they did like Banishment during their opponent's turn, their opponent would still be able to play. Learning how to activate those effects and the toolbox that is available to them is great. Not to mention, it introduces the idea that spell and trap cards can be activated from and within the graveyard. So that won't be an alien concept to them when they get to the competitive sphere and see things like Sky Strikers and like Phantom Knights and Orcists and things like that, activating a lot of effects in the graveyard. So it's really, really great for a new player to have that kind of experience with a deck like this before moving on to more competitive things. Foolish Burial Goods also balances that out quite nicely by showing them that you can toolbox the graveyard in addition to the deck. So if they haven't been playing for years and are, kind of convinced that the graveyard is not a great place for cards, and of course they'll eventually learn, but this will allow you to convince them, and you say, hey, Foolish Burial Goods, you discard it. If you've got Ixchel around, you have an extra option to shuffle back with Ixchel's effect. So those common effects that they have allow them to shuffle cards back, learn about quick effects, and get more than one activation of an effect once per turn. They also have to learn, with the trap cards at least, with discarding those Darklords, the ideas behind resource management and ensuring that, they don't discard that Darklord or that one card that they do need in their hand in order to activate that trap card, and activating it at the right moment can spell the difference between victory and defeat. Moving on, one of the greatest things that I think this deck is able to teach is the idea that as the spells and traps are very simple, so too are the monsters. Now, each monster has a specific effect that makes it great. And one of the ones that I want to draw out, of course, first, before I do that, is Darklord Ixchel. Each one of them, works tandem with the Darklord cards. So you can say it's not just Darklord monsters, it's Darklord cards that they can work with. So Ixchel, for instance, discarding itself and one Darklord card to draw 2 cards. And then you've got that Ixchel and the other card in the graveyard for use later. Nasten is also really, really simple for them to be able to understand, because it's, the effect that sets it apart is the one where you discard any 2 Darklord cards and special summon him to the field. So it basically, I think that person will like that a lot because it allows them to get a big beat stick on the field very, very early. One that's 2600, so you can use it alongside Eradicator Epidemic Virus for major effect. Of course, you've got Darklord Amdusk in here to fetch things, whatever they want, back to their hand. So that's also something that I think they would very, very much enjoy. And explaining to them the difference between Darklords that do have that effect and ones that don't. Tezcatlipoca is great for introducing the idea of hand traps without actually, spending the money on Drolls or Ashes or things like that. And the idea that, your opponent may have cards that they can activate from their hand just as you do. And finally, of course, Darklord Morningstar to teach them about special summoning from decks and setting up properly for an OTK, as well as demonstrating the idea that cards cannot be targeted by card effects. But, for instance, if this comes up against an Ignister, you're not going to really be too lucky on that front. So that, I think, is really, really great, and the way that all of the new mainline Darklord support kind of combines together in order to teach the deck in a proper, simple, and efficient way. Now, some of the other cards that I wanted to point out as well are different cards that you can run with it. And one of the favorite things that this deck can teach is having to do with Darklord Superbia, Darklord Contact, and any Darklord that has the 1000, effect. Basically, what you're going to see is that with Darklord Contact, it allows you to easily access Superbia for its special summon, and then you get any other Darklord back. You can go for an XYZ if you bring back another level 8, for instance, and it's a really, really cool play. You special it in defense, but there's no restriction on the one that Superbia special summons. But let's say you shuffle back Darklord Contact with Tez's on-field effect. Well, Darklord Superbia will miss the timing. And how do you know that? Because of the way that the effects are worded, with Darklord Superbia having a when/you can effect, which will miss the timing when it's shuffled back with this, since the shuffle is the last thing to happen and not the special summon of Superbia, so the effect will not resolve for Superbia. It will have missed the timing. And when I think missing the timing and Seagok are some of the two hardest things for newer players to learn. And I feel like this interaction between Superbia and Darklord Contact, which are two extremely simple, very straight line cards, and then they'll understand the concept of missing the timing going forward and be taking a look out for when you can effects versus if you can, or when you can do this, like mandatory effects. The final monsters and stuff that I want to show into this deck are the two Darklord Zerados, which teach you about that, and then the two Archlord Christias for the special summon off of Darklord Superbia, as just basically options that you can go into to wipe out your opponent's board. You need to work with these monsters in order to get the most out of them. And they're tough to work with, but if you can figure out, like for instance, Christia's effect to put it on the top of the deck, and Zerado's effect to destroy it during the end phase, it activates its effect. The effects are not once per turn, especially Zerado's effect. So unless it explicitly says so in the wording, they can activate that effect for as many cards as they have in their hand. And having them keep an eye out for the language of the card is very, very important. So that, I believe, is like everything that can teach you. And those nice level 8s in there pair well, of course, with the trade-in, allow you to teach them more a little bit about the card economy and how they might use their monsters, or utilize Zerado, for instance, as a resource before he pops himself during the end phase. Now, as you guys know, this deck is a very draw-heavy deck, and I feel like that is a fantastic way to teach someone about how to manage their hand. Darklords are a very, very focused deck on hand management, and Trade-In and Allure of Darkness do a great job at having them like take a look at the hand and see, okay, what is essential? What do I need for my plays? Think ahead for what you need for your plays, and then how do you execute it? Now, granted, every single deck in the game, you have to have those thoughts, but I feel like combining it together with all of the other things that you're learning within Darklords themselves, this is just one of those lessons that you're gonna have to learn anyway, and that is very, very good to have. You don't want to be banishing anything with Allure, and Allure and Trade-In have downsides if you don't have the cards in your hand necessary for them. So it's definitely something nice to be able to point out at that moment. The last lesson, the last real lesson, I would say, of course, is Pot of Desires. Now, most new players would believe that this card is a -9. You're taking away all the cards that you could use in your deck. But in Darklords, I think that the lesson that you take is that this is a card you can activate at any time, provided it's early enough in the duel. You can activate it at any point, and Desires will be able to grab you 2 cards off the top of your deck. The idea being that you don't care, like whatever those 9 cards are, doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the 2 that you grab off the top. And those 2 could be the difference between victory and defeat. No one card in the Darklord deck really will lead to victory over any other card. There's no win condition, which is why Desires is so great. Every Darklord does the effect of every others, and you have multiples in there to prevent them from getting banished. So there is a lot of benefit to having Pot of Desires and having them activated on a regular occasion to see it really is not as bad as many, many casual players are making the card out to be. Of course, a deck cannot be complete unless you have this stuff in here. The My Body as a Shield, as well as the Monster Reborn. They know these cards, these are familiar, and Monster Reborn tethers them to utilize them in the same ways. That is going to wrap it up, I would say, for what, in my opinion, is the greatest deck to teach a new or beginning player how to be better at competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! But it's a great springboard for them to learn the very, very basics, and then if they want to play other decks, they can build off of that extremely strong foundation to do much more in this game. So guys, that's going to about wrap it up for this video. If you liked it, please remember to rate, comment, subscribe to the Team Time Riders YouTube channel. This has been the Merman Master, and we'll catch you guys next time. Peace.